Hello to all of our amazing Legit KidLit viewers. I'm Tiffany, your host for Legit KidLit today. We miss you, Alexis. I hope you all are excited because if you love novels in verse like we do, we've got some really wonderful novel in verse authors here today. During our last novel in verse episode, we spoke a bit about what a novel in verse was and when they first came out many, many years ago. This episode, we love to dive a little deeper, hear from our panel of authors about what makes a novel in verse special and unique. But before we begin, we would love to have everyone introduce themselves using a haiku. So, who'd like to begin?
I'll go first.
Sounds great.
Okay, so I'm Rajani LaRocca. That's not part of my haiku, but here it comes. Doctor and writer of novels in verse and prose, science is poetic.
Love it. Awesome. All right, Chris, you want to go next?
Wow, that was so good. Okay. I'm Chris Barron. Hi, everyone. Family holds me while I plant trees in new soil, writing books about hope.
Oh, beautiful.
Yay! That's so Chris.
All right.
I'm Diana Farid. Thank you for having me. I think I could have used both of those haikus to introduce myself. We have so much in common, but here is mine. Let's see. Starlight, skin, sea waves. In our hearts, I write to breathe the colors of love.
Oh my goodness. This is also
beautiful.
We were also supposed to have Cookie here today. She may end up joining us. She did have some technical difficulties. So if she pops on, awesome. If not, we miss you, and be on the lookout for her Twitter. All of her stuff is in the bottom of our description. So you can check her out on Twitter. And she also has a giveaway going on. So that's awesome too. All right, so and anybody can kind of start off, how would you describe a novel in verse to someone that has never heard of one? We do see a lot of people that ask in schools and things like that, like, what is a novel in verse? So how would you describe it if they've never heard of one, and what makes it special or unique?
Okay, so I'll jump in. Why not? So first of all, I would describe poetry, just kind of in my own words, as language that, or a form of writing that describes experience in a concentrated and emotional way, using specific language to evoke emotion. And a novel is a narrative in which something happens to someone, right? And it involves, plot and character and theme and all kinds of, things that we think of when we think of a story. And a verse novel combines both of those elements. And so it's a novel written in poetry, and but different from just poetry by itself, in that it's meant to be read in a specific order, and that it has all the elements of a novel.
Awesome. Anybody else want to jump in? And Cookie, we can't hear you, but if you want to type in the comments at all, feel free. We did tell everybody you have an awesome giveaway going on your Twitter, so they're going to check that out as well. Anyone else want to talk about, I know, a novel in verse and what makes it unique?
Yeah, I think I would just add to the beautiful definition that Rajani just shared with us, that the novel in verse format allows the storyteller to break free from sentences. And I think that structure of the words allows for both sort of this visual storytelling aspect that may not be as present in prose. And it allows for sort of this playful element where you might be able to go back and reread a poem and get new meaning out of it. So I think both that visual kind of painting that we can see, and also that song-like lyrical opportunity that's there with the way that the words are ordered, is really neat for both the writer and as for the reader. And And then there's that extra space around the words that allows the reader and storyteller to reflect on the often very big emotions that are trying to be described.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree with these definitions. I'll just add to it if possible, just to say that I was looking up quotes about like what is poetry, because this question is a great question that leads into so many like layers of questions. So I agree with that. I think I always love poetry because it takes what I would say like is the power of a whole novel and packs it into the most concise form that you can. So I was looking at Lawrence Ferlinghetti said, poetry is eternal graffiti written in the heart of everyone. And I love that. And then Rita Dove said, poetry is language at its most distilled and most powerful. And so if you like follow that guideline that Rita Dove made, you know, I think in novels in verse do that. It's like, I don't know about, not to get into writing process maybe even yet, but this idea that, you know, for every one poem I write, there's many other poems that happen. And so I'm trying always to distill. And I've said this many times too, like the idea that novels in verse bring out like the internal landscape of a character in a different way. And so you have plot, character, setting, point of view, theme, conflict happening just like any novel, but there's an internal look, an internal landscape that's visible to the reader in a different way.
I don't know. Hi, I don't know if anybody can hear me, and if anybody could catch me up. What was the last thing kind of said? And I'm so sorry, StreamYard viewers, that I'm having difficulty with technology. I don't know.
It's all good. We can hear you now. So
okay.
If you'd like to introduce yourself with the haiku.
Oh, I sure will. My name is Cookie. I can speak in 7 tongues. My heart hears poems best.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, so we were talking about, I think the last time when I kind of was able to pop in, we were talking about novels in verse. And Chris, what did you say earlier? I caught like the tail end.
There were some really good descriptions by Diana and Rajani about like what is a novel in verse, what makes it distinctive. So what are your thoughts? I mean, what do you think makes a novel in verse?
So what I love about poetry in general is that you can paint a picture with just a few words, right? I'm all about the economy of language. And I think with a novel in verse, especially for middle grade and kids, I often say that when a story is too complicated, I write it in a poem and I write it for kids when it's too complicated for adults. Because I think there's a sort of like an openness to verse that then folks who read a novel in verse can take from the story what they need, right? Especially in that economy of language. I mean, y'all know we kind of, every single word in a poem matters. And I think that makes us focus really hard on, okay, especially in a novel, like, is this particular word moving the plot forward? Is it moving the scene forward? And that's what I love about it is that's that challenge in a way of communicating what you need to in just a very few short lines.
And that's funny because it kind of segues into my next question. Would you say it's easier or harder to write a novel in verse?
Easier. I'm writing a novel now. My second novel, middle grade novel, is not in verse, and it's an epistolary, just like Rajani and Chris's upcoming joint novel. Yay! So excited. And still, I'm like, oh no, entire sentences that have to be kind of coherent because it's a letter. How do I do this? But with the novel in verse, it was a little bit easier to say, oh, I can say it with just this one word or these 3 words, right? Because you're going for the emotion, I think, in novels in verse, right? And so then people take from the emotion the words that they kind of fill in the words that they need to make that emotion make sense.
I think it depends on I don't know. There are times when like things are easy, and there are times when things are difficult. No matter what form you write in. So I feel that there's certain kinds of emotional scenes or emotional topics that I think come more easily to me or more readily to me in verse. And then there are more plot heavy or dialogue heavy types of scenes that are more of a challenge to write in verse. Like you need to make sure that, you know, your voices are distinctive and distinct, and that it's clear what is happening. So yeah, my next novel that is coming out next March is Mirror to Mirror, which is in verse, and it's with identical twin sisters. So that was a challenge. I need to make them different from each other. They're both in verse. And right now I am drafting my next novel, which is a fantasy, and there's so many elements there that I could not imagine doing it in poetry. But wow, it is also hard to do in prose. I think it's just hard. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But I think it just depends. And I will say that when I was writing Red, White, and Whole, there were times when it was hard, not because of the actual writing process, but because there were scenes that were very emotional, and I wanted to make sure it was a challenge, but also a gift to try and make sure that I boiled things down to only what they needed to be, and no less and no more, in order to convey what I wanted to convey.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I had something to add to that, which is with novels in verse, I feel like the only challenge that I had when I was doing the final editing of the novels in verse is that some of the kids I had kid readers, beta readers for We Belong, and I needed to write more poetry to be the connective tissue, because the adult beta readers understood the context between well, why would there be two POVs? Why would there be 2 points of view with the goddess of the moon and also the mom? And how the adult beta readers got that it was parallel stories, but the kids didn't. So with middle grade, and especially, that was a new challenge for me to write poems that were kind of strictly practical, where you're going down a checklist and going, oh right, so they didn't understand this plot point, and so I have to write this one poem to have that connective tissue. That really for me was like the biggest challenge when writing.
So we have a viewer here, Colleen, that is asking, how do you decide when to use verse? Do you know when you start writing that you're planning to use it, or do some of the novels just speak to you in verse? So if anybody would like to answer that.
I could take a shot at it. So this book, which is very earmarked, sorry, All of Me was definitely like born in verse and remained there. Like it was an exploration of the mind of this character, and it was without a doubt verse. I wrote way too many poems. And then Magical and Perfect.
Never said no such thing.
Oh yes, there is. No, from a practical, I know what you mean. I think that there are, but from a practical standpoint, it's like, oh my gosh. Magical and Perfect was different in that it felt more concise and quickie, like you were saying. The connective poems needed to be put in there to make it speak to one another. So there'd be conceptual, scenes that needed that kind of connective tissue, with other poems. And then my next book coming out is called The Gray, and it's not in verse. And kind of hearkening back to the previous question, like I've never revised a book so many times. I've never worked on it so many times. It's just the most ambitious book, of the heart that I can think of. But it definitely, it's a book that could have been in verse, but seemed to have a different language it was speaking. So it's not, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to decide necessarily, although I feel like the book that's coming after that will be in verse. So one of the things about being an author, I think, that is so fun and difficult is the constant learning. Like, I feel like I'm always learning the answers to these questions. So like a year from now, I'll have a different answer maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true for me too. I feel like probably a year from now I'll answer this differently, but right now, every single book that I've written, even way back, like when I used to write what the kids these days call fanfic, I actually wrote like an entire novel that was a fanfic of New Kids on the Block. I'm not even kidding. And but every single book that I've ever written started with a poem. Because that's, I feel like, again, like I sound like such a hippie when I say this, but it's the language that my heart speaks. And so whenever an emotion hits me, I think that's why I'm also like obsessed with music, is because I listen to the lyrics and then the emotion of it hits me and I go, oh, it's that emotion that I want to capture. And then, so I start with a poem, and as I'm writing the poem, I start to go, actually, wait, this is more than just one poem. It's several. So with We Belong, that's actually what happened. Is I started with one poem and I said, there's more to this. And I was rereading it and I'm like, there's more to this than I said 10 years ago when I first wrote this poem. And I kind of, by peeling those layers of what is behind this? Why did I write this? Like, what are all the reasons why I wrote this poem? And line by line, kind of going through and finding the stories between the lines, right? And kind of going, oh, the reason why this piece of the poem happened is because of, and then there's like 3 chapters right there that happen. And whether or not it's verse or prose, I don't really know until I write it. I didn't know that this current book that I'm writing is an epistolary until I started writing it. And I don't know, I like Rajani and Chris, I don't know if that was the same for you guys when you started writing your current novel. Like I read a comment that you said on your Instagram talking about the book and how it felt like you were writing letters to each other, which I think is a fun way of thinking about writing books together. And my writing partner, Sean David Hutchinson, whose book Howl is out right now, he and I write together, but this is the first epistolary that I'm writing, and right now, I think he was influenced by that, by like kind of writing semi-epistolary in his current book, even though that's not the book that we're working on together. So I'm like, it kind of creeps in, your projects start to blend into each other. And that's when I kind of know, like, oh, I'm kind of in my, my blue period, my epistolary period right now. So that's kind of what's happening. So, yeah.
Yes,
Diana,
for me, yeah, I mean, I think it's the way that I process. It's the way that I write. So for me, it's easier to write in verse. My first, the first things that I devoured in terms of reading were liner notes. So that was my first introduction to poetry, and then it was Rumi and Japanese poems about the ocean and Shakespeare. So it's how I think, it's how I process. So for me, it's actually easier to write, I think, initially in poems and verse, although I write essays and prose, obviously. I haven't yet written a prose novel or other story, but it's certainly, I feel what all of the others have shared in terms of oftentimes that kind of becomes clear as you're exploring the character and the story that you're trying to tell. So, yeah.
I mean, I will say that the novel that Chris and I have coming out next year, which is epistolary, it is not in poetry, it is in prose, but So it really was us writing to each other. We came up with this idea, and then we would like each write a chapter and like basically like throw it over the wall like a letter to, I mean, it was a letter.
That's so cool.
To each other's characters. And then we would have these times where our characters would be chatting, and those got intense, Chris, right?
So intense. I think that's when we knew we had something, but yeah, for sure. Those were really
I was like, he's hurting my feelings. I was thinking that while we were typing to each other. We're literally on a Google Doc together, and I'm like, oh.
Like method writing. Yeah.
Yes, it was really interesting.
It's so funny that you met. It's like that's kind of when Sean and I were drafting the novel that we're eventually going to write together. We each have other novels that are due before we can start writing the one that we're writing together. But when we were just ideating, we were talking like, well, I was like, dude, why are you trying to hurt my feelings right now? I don't like the way your character is talking to my character. That's not cool. Because we each picked a character to write in the voice of, right? So because it's not an epistolary, but the way that we've imagined the story is sort of like a character experiences something and they write about it, and then the next character experiences kind of the same thing, but that there's like an overlap of like, here's where their Venn diagrams crossed, and then here's where like it's a completely different point of view. So then when he sort of says what he's going to do with the character, I'm like, oh, how dare, I don't like that. Ooh. Diana, have you ever written with somebody before?
No, not yet. It might come. Yeah, it sounds so fun. I would love to. Yeah.
It sounds fun, but also
I feel like the picture book process is similar.
The
For me,
picture book process, yeah.
I think, the relationship that I had with the illustrator for my picture book, even though, we didn't know each other beforehand and I didn't pick him per se, it was magical in that way, in terms of the relationship and how we came to the story differently and yet very much the same. It felt like the universe meant for that to happen. And that was a dialogue that I would imagine is somewhat similar to writing a longer piece of work with somebody else.
Except that's sequential, right? Whereas we were doing it at the same time, which was really cool. But the picture book illustrator process is incredible. I just shut up and sit back because it's amazing. You're just like, wait, what? Like that's what it's so shocking and amazing. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
I agree.
I only had a few illustrations in We Belong, just kind of like to have some of the poems actually come to life. And when I first saw the cover for We Belong, my publisher emailed it to me. I emailed just the pencil sketch, right? And I had just exchanged emails with the illustrator, Abigail de la Cruz, and she came up with this pencil sketch that I was working in the library, and I had to stop writing and like take my earphones off and cry because it was so beautiful. And I couldn't believe that she had captured the emotion of what I was trying to say in in a pencil sketch, right? It didn't even have the final color or anything. And that was actually the point, a really, really important point for me, where I felt like, okay, this thing actually might work. Because somebody read a poem that I wrote, and here's the picture that they drew, and it's exactly what I thought, and also exactly not what I thought it would be. So the illustrate, like when you work with an illustrator like that, and you see what they saw in your poem, it's magic.
I think, okay, that makes me think of something. Can I just share, like, as a verse novelist, like as a poet, and I wonder if anyone else feels this way. Like what you're describing is kind of what I hope for readers when they read a poem in a verse novel, that they're collaborating with the book in a sense, to come up with the imagery, the art of that scene. Because Because one thing about verse novels that I think is not talked about very often, but and I'm reading, for example, I'm reading Diana's book right now, beautiful book, and I think it's true of this book and other books, is that each poem stands on its own, and yet it's part of this collective whole. And there's a collaboration with the reader to read the poem, get the image, and then carry the story through. And you know, so when an illustrator, for a cover artist, for example, captures that, I think as authors we feel that, right? Like someone really got it. But our hope, our deep hope, right, as verse novelists, that someone's getting in on the bigger picture on all the pages.
Yeah.
And that even though it's not necessarily a story or an idea that the reader might have come up with by themselves,
right,
that they read it and they're like, oh, I know what that feels like. Even if you're nothing like that character, I know what that feels like. It's part of human experience. It's just the most wonderful thing as an author.
When I look at that, I'm like, I can't, like, she has the two sisters, which are, you know, the sisterhood is a central theme in this book. And then Abigail like drew this, which about the mom, because the story is about a mom telling a bedtime story to her kids. And when I was like, okay, stop sending me drawings when I'm in the library to my publisher, because I was just like, I can't keep crying in this library. They're going to kick me out. Yeah. But then she sent this and I was like, okay, you know what? It's time to go home, because I'm just going to cry over all these drawings when she's sending me these proofs and they're going to kick me out of this library. But that's, yeah, it's like when somebody can take your drawing and can take your poem and draw something like that then elicits the same emotion from you that you were trying to elicit with the poem. Again, you'd think because I'm a writer, I could come up with a word for it other than magic, but it's magic. I don't know how else to describe it, you know?
Mm-hmm. All right. So I think we have time for one more question. And I had at least two more. So maybe I'll throw them both out there and then you can decide on which one you want to answer. So one of the questions was if you could choose a nonfiction or a picture book to pair with your middle grade book or a theme in your book, which one would you choose and why? So that's really helpful for teachers and librarians out there, but also make those connections. And then the other question is if you have a recent favorite novel in verse that you'd want to recommend to readers, we'd love to hear it. So you can answer both or one or the other, or answer them on Twitter later if you need some more time to think, but we would love to hear what you got.
Oh, wow. So I'll go first. Whenever I write a book, I always think about, one of the questions I ask is, who is this a love letter to? And this isn't necessarily a recommendation for nonfiction works, but if you, I feel like a lot of the themes in We Belong are in Joey Ayala's music. He's a Filipino musician. And I even have a Spotify playlist that I'm sure all of us have playlists of like the book, you know, about the book or like that we play while we're writing our books, right? And so Joey Ayala's music, I think, would be, and also that Spotify playlist that I'll tweet out after this is a perfect companion for this book, for We Belong. This book right here. And a recent favorite novel in verse is The Moon Within by Ida Salazar. It's such a great book that I think captures the awkwardness of becoming a woman and not just becoming a woman, but going through adolescence in general and trying to figure out gender and sexuality when, you know, there are all these voices telling you what it should be, including your culture. And I'm loving it. I'm still in the middle of reading it, but I'm really loving it.
So
I'll go next.
please go.
I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
No, please go, Diana.
Sorry, Rajani.
No problem.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Wave is it's different. It's very different. My novel in verse Wave is very different than When You Breathe, but it's also incredibly similar. And so I'd have to pair at the risk of sounding a little bit self-indulgent, Wave with When You Breathe. I mean, Wave is about a girl finding her voice and her sense of home through music and poetry. And When You Breathe is literally the poetic science of respiration for young children. I mean, it follows the journey of a breath through the lungs of a little girl as it is then exhaled as a starlight song. And literally the oxygen we breathe was fused in the reactions of hydrogen and helium in the stars. I mean, we are literally breathing starlight, and Wave reflects that beauty as well. They're both about the value in our voice, what home means, what it means to find our voice, and how we define and find the privilege to experience the wonders and difficulties and awe of life. So for me, I would pair it with When You Breathe. And then in terms of novel and verse, I mean, there's just way too many to choose from. But recently I've gone back to Full Cicada Moon. I think that it was published back in 2015, but I think it was almost before its time. I mean, it reflects themes of racism, identity, multicultural heritage, science, people trying to define what you should do versus what you want to do, and what you should be doing from your own heart. So those are how I would answer those questions.
So in terms of picture books to pair with Red, White, and Whole, the first one that came to mind was Dreamers, because of the aspects of kind of immigration and what a parent hopes for a child, and also the power of books and stories to connect all, which I just thought was so beautiful. And there's a lot of the same themes in Red, White, and Whole. And then, I mean, if you want to read one of my picture books to pair with Red, White, and Whole, I would recommend Where Three Oceans Meet, which is illustrated by Archana Srinivasan, and it's just so it is a love story about basically between a girl and her mother and her grandmother. And it's about 3 generations of women traveling somewhere together. And Red, White, and Whole is really a love story between a girl and her mother as well. So I would say those two go together. The other question, I love so many verse novels, but one that I really would recommend strongly is Rebecca Caparra's Worst Case Colin, which is just so... like, it is a page turner of a verse novel. I started reading it and I was like, oh my goodness, what happens? And it's about a boy whose mother has died, and he is living with his father, who has a hoarding problem. And he's old enough to kind of realize that this is a problem, but also he knows that if he tells people about it, that he could be taken away from the only parent he has left. So it is so good. It's really, really good. I love it.
I'm with you. There's so many books I want to like yell about. I did mention Dana's book already, but I also recently read, it's not out yet, it's called Ode to Nobody, Caroline Dubois. That's coming out in the fall, I think. That's a great novel in verse, highly recommend. And then for picture book, so I think for Magical and Perfect, which ended up being such a like multi-layered, complex story, and one of the stories in there, a big one, is about Angel Island immigration. And that's not very well discussed. I mean, it's not much known about it. But there are great picture books about it. One is Virginia Lohagen's Paper Sun, which talks a lot about Angel Island immigration, how it impacted primarily Chinese immigrants, but also like I talk about Filipino, Russian, Jewish immigrants, all these groups of people who ended up there. And so this is illustrated by Wilson Ong and written by Helen Foster James and Virginia Lohagen. So this is a big recommendation to go along Magical and Perfect. In fact, I've heard from people that they've read both together and it's helpful. And I like this question because it's true that books really do complement each other and can provide a deeper, richer experience. So
Oh, what a great note to kind of end on, even though I don't want us to end, but here we are. I want to quickly throw out, we have some book giveaways going on. Cookie, if you want to talk about yours, and then we'll talk about the rest.
Yeah. So for a personalized paperback of We Belong, the paperback actually has discussion questions in the back that are exclusive to the paperback. And I'm giving away, there are 3 copies left for giveaway. If y'all just donate to either NARAL or Planned Parenthood or the Trevor Project or another LGBTQIA youth-focused organization, then and DM me your receipt and your address, mailing address, then I'll send you a personalized copy of We Belong. It's on my pinned tweet, and I'll, again, retweet all of the stuff that I'm supposed to tweet that I said I would tweet throughout the whole thing. So yeah, hopefully we'll get some books out there to y'all.
Yeah, awesome. And everybody else, I believe, is going to be giving away a book. Is that where we're at? Okay.
Yeah.
So we will be hosting those on our Twitter. So be on the lookout. It will go out probably sometime tonight. And definitely be retweeting this episode and sharing with your friends. So we just want to say thank you so much to all of our spectacular novel and verse authors. We appreciate you so, so much. And thank you for creating and sharing such beautiful stories with the world.
Thank you,
you so
Tiffany.
much.
Such a pleasure
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Aloha.
Thank
Yep. To all
Thank
of our
you,
readers,
all.
if you enjoyed our show and are inspired to pick up some new and amazing books, we'll be back next weekend with some more KidLit fun. See you later.
Bye.